Welcome back to the Power Hour. Thank you for joining us, caring about your world and then talking about it. We're going to be discussing the history of gun control today with two individuals. They do a radio show together. And I encourage you to listen to their show. Check out other alternative news radio shows and then encourage people to listen to them. The Freedom Link on Orion Talk Radio. Joe Joseph joins us today, and also a radio veteran of many years, Tim Watts, who's been in the mainstream medical community, who's now doing this talk show on Orion, joins us today. And unfortunately, gentlemen, I didn't get your bio, so we're going to let you talk about who you are and what you are and why you're doing what you're talking about today. So thank you very much, Joe and Tim, for joining us on the Power Hour. Welcome, gentlemen, to the Power Hour.
Thank you for having us, Joyce. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Tim. Joe, first of all, I'm going to start off with you. Tell us who Joe Joseph is and why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, I've been doing this since 2008. Woke up right around then, and basically, well, it was about 2007, actually, right when the Lehman Brothers thing happened, even before that. And to be honest with you, it was lines in the sky that actually started doing it. My wife calls me one day, and she goes, "You ever notice the lines in the sky, how they just stay there?" I'm like, "No, you know what? I really haven't." And so down the rabbit hole we went. And so I got into activism through doing, things. First started off on Blog Talk Radio and then kind of worked my way up along the way. And the Freedom Link was kind of put together to bring like-minded people together as far as networking, and it kind of evolved into a radio broadcast. And that's where we are today on Orion Talk Radio, every night at 9 p.m. Eastern, Monday to Friday, and then Sunday from 7 to 9. And what I like to focus on is government corruption and corporate corruption, especially in regards to the United States. I mean, of course it happens all over the world, but the fact is that right now in the United States, we're at a precipice.
Absolutely,
we're getting attacked at all sides. I mean,
absolutely. There's no doubt about that. Before we go into those issues, though, and there are many, let me go to Tim and find out about Tim. Tim, give us your background and why are you doing what you're doing on the issue of gun control?
Hi, Joyce. I'll make it real brief. 25-year radio career. Finished my last 10 years in San Francisco as a program director, and then spent another 5 years as a national consultant before I actually tired of commercial terrestrial radio because of basically the deregulation and how it wrecked broadcasting. And then eventually gravitated here now just recently to alternative radio, and I've come to work with Orion Talk Radio. And, my wake-up was actually long ago, a young boy, watching JFK die. And so I knew something was wrong in our country. But 9/11 was really the punctuation, the exclamation mark for me, Joyce. And, when I saw the towers fall that day, I knew right away this was a controlled demolition because I got my stopwatch. I did the time, and I thought, this is impossible. There's something wrong here. And so from that, I really threw my soul into this full time since September 11th, 9/11. And, again, it's been a full-time job here.
Interesting that it was 9/11 for you, contrails, chemtrails for Joe. And it's always something for us that gets, that gores our own ox that we realize. Mine happened to be the sale of biologicals to Iraq in 1996 when I was trying to figure out why Gulf War veterans, including myself, were so sick. And I found out that they had sold biologicals and chemicals to Iraq. So that was my sort of epiphany, and we all have one. And it's important that everybody understand we've got to find that hot point of somebody else that's going to stir them into action. And, of course, I think now gun control is one of those big issues. Gun control, without a doubt, is going to bring people together. Let me go back to you, Joe, and ask, how armed do you think this country is? I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10 now, how armed is this country from the civilian standpoint?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably say 11. And let me say why. Admiral Yamamoto during World War II, when they were discussing the invasion of the United States, because Japan had considered invading the mainland United States, when talking with the emperor, told the emperor, no, that's not a good idea because you'll find a gun in the United States behind every blade of grass. And there is no possible way that we'll be able to get an invasion to happen. Not with Japan's firepower and manpower. Never. It would never be able to happen. And that was World War II. Look at gun sales today. I mean, just take a look since Obama was elected president. I mean, we've had record after record after record. It seems like each month they break the record on FBI background checks. Just last month alone, there was 2.8 million background checks done. And, you know, you only have to do it once. And it doesn't matter how many firearms you buy at the time. So you know at a minimum there were 2.8 million commercial gun sales. That doesn't count private sales. So you're talking just a whole lot of guns being sold in a very short period of time. And I want to say there's close to 300 million guns in the United States. So, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of firepower. And one that, you know, the government knows, not so much the government, but the control freaks want to get it under control because it's a threat to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's do the who, what, where, when, and why, because I want to know who it is that is going to come after the guns. Who is our enemy in this? Who is the enemy of the Second Amendment?
Yeah, well, that's where you have to let history show the way. And it started way back. And we'll start during the Revolutionary and even the colonial era. Tim, it was colonial script that really kicked things off. Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, Joyce, money, is indeed the root of all evil, at least the love of it. And the monarchy and the financial interests from England have never, ever really let go. And it's those underlying deep financial interests and these secret organizations that have sprouted from Europe that have actually caused America a lot of pain. And as Joe mentioned, yeah, colonial script was the first thing. Actually, it's interest-free money. And we've only had three versions of interest-free money in the history of the United States. We had the colonial script, we had the Lincoln greenbacks, and we had the Kennedy silver certificates. And every one of those ended in disaster because the big monetary powers did not want this. Now, the colonial script was interest-free money created by the colonists, and this is actually what got around to the American Revolution. It's not quite what our history books tell us. If you listen to Napoleon, and if you listen to Winston Churchill, they'll tell you the history is written by the victors. They're not going to tell you about, what the opponent thought. They're going to tell you about their version of history. And so the version of history we get, Joyce, is not altogether accurate. It goes back to when we, again, created the colonial script. England did not like that. So in 1751, they had the Currency Act, which started to make a crackdown on that. The final Currency Act of 1764 destroyed our colonial script. And let me read you a quick quote from Benjamin Franklin as to why this was so important or why this was such a big deal. From Benjamin Franklin, he says, "The colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The ability of colonists to get power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War." And, so once they kill the colonial script here in the United States, all hell tends to break loose. And in 1776, that's when we head into the American Revolution for Independence, the war with Britain and the Crown.
Right. And at the same time, Joyce, over in Europe, the power brokers that are actually pushing this, they meet in Bavaria, in Germany, and it was Adam Weishaupt that was tasked by Mayor Amschel Rothschild to come up with the idea or the organization of the Bavarian Illuminati. Now, this is what established the New World Order. And Adam Weishaupt, people think that Karl Marx and his 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto was an idea or brainchild of Karl Marx, and it wasn't. You can go back to Adam Weishaupt in 1776 and look at the objectives that he laid out for the New World Order. And it was abolition of ordered governments, abolition of private property, abolition of inheritance, abolition of patriotism, abolition of the family, abolition of religion, and a creation of a world government. So this is way back in 1776. Now, how do you go and establish that if you have an armed citizenry? You just can't do it, you know, which leads us to our next point in the timeline, 1821. Now, in 1821, of course, by then you have this structure somewhat established, and George W.F. Hegel formulates what's called the Hegelian dialectic. A lot of people don't understand that it's the Hegelian dialectic that's used time and time again to get what they want. Case in point, this is what the Hegelian dialectic is. You foment a crisis. Then there's an enormous public outcry that something must be done about the problem. So you offer a solution that brings about the changes you really wanted all along, but which people would have been unwilling to accept initially. Look at 9/11. 9/11 was Hegelian dialectic all the way. You know, you can even take a look at just this last thing, Sandy Hook, Hegelian dialectic. You know, use a crisis. It's like Rahm Emanuel says, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, that's because that's the Hegelian dialectic. And people need to understand that this stuff is not new. It's not new that these people have been trying to do this for centuries. We can go back farther than 1773 as far as trying to establish this new world order.
All right, we've got a 4-minute break. We'll be back after the 4-minute break with Tim Watts and Joe Joseph. We're talking about the history of gun control. What an education we're getting today. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Power Hour. Thank you for joining us. It is 24 minutes after the hour. Wherever you're sitting, it's all about talking to people and helping them understand the predicament we're in. And if you don't know your history, you will repeat it. Joining us today, Joe Joseph and Tim Watts to help us understand the history behind gun control. Go ahead, gentlemen. Where do you want to go from here? Because the very fact that we can go back so far and see the desire to want to take away one's weapons, hopefully will empower people to understand that this is not just something to protect people after Sandy Hook.
Well, Joyce, first off, it's not really a desire to control our weapons as much as it is to control this country. And the only way they can control the country is by taking our weapons away. Now, let me back up just a quick moment, because as we mentioned, you know, it comes down to the love of money, but money is power. And to punctuate that point, Mayor Ansel Rothschild said, he's the founder of the House of Rothschild. He said, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." And he is so absolutely right. And that gets us back to when we were talking about the Currency Act of 1751 and 1764. They did not want us having interest-free currency, so they took that away from us. And then we had the American Revolution for Independence. But later on after that, you know, we actually did fall into another central bank. It was the First National Bank, which was set up in 1791. Our forefathers were prescient enough to know that, you know, there should be a 20-year charter on such institutions. They did not want to see them exist for a long time, as the same with corporations. So the First National Bank came and went from 1791 to 1811. Then we had a second national bank, which we were kind of pushed into after the War of 1812, and James Madison supported that. That bank lasted not through its entire 20-year charter per se, because Andrew Jackson is the one that killed that. He realized also that central banks were a grave danger to this country. So Andrew Jackson vetoed the bank bill in 1832. He withdrew all of the U.S. funds in 1833, and then he let that second national bank actually collapse in 1836. So that was the death of the First National Bank and the death of the Second National Bank.
And consequently, Tim, let me just interject. Let's not forget that it was around that time that there was an assassination attempt on President Jackson where the pistol, the revolver, both of them misfired. I mean, you want to talk about divine providence. I mean, so, and that seems to be the case with every time we try to institute our own money. The guy that tries to do it ends up being knocked off or tried to be assassinated. Isn't that right, buddy?
Yep, and as Joe's very correct. Jackson they tried to assassinate him in 1835, so that was 1 year before the bank charter expired. So even though he pulled all U.S. funds out in 1833, they were still trying. They thought, we're not going to let this Second National Bank collapse. We will keep it around. So they tried to off Jackson. He survived, in 1835, and then 1 year later, their Second National Bank charter, expires, and that upset the moneyed interests of England greatly.
Absolutely. Now, I'm gonna fast forward just a little bit to 1848 because this is where the communist side of it comes in, the socialism comes in. And it was Moses Mordecai Marx Levy, alias Karl Marx. He writes the Communist Manifesto, and he's a member of the Illuminati front organization called the League of the Just. And he not only advocates economic and political changes, but he also advocates moral and spiritual changes as well. He says, quote, "We must war against all prevailing ideas of religion, of the state, of country, and of patriotism. The idea of God is the keynote of a perverted civilization. It must be destroyed." And this is their prevailing idea that goes forward. Well, if you get rid of patriotism, remember what the Second Amendment was put in place for. That was to keep us safe from a tyrannical government. Well, if you have that passion within you, that's patriotism. You want to make sure that our beloved republic stays intact and stays within the bounds of the Constitution. Well, how do you do that? You do that with guns. You make sure that you're armed to prevent a tyrannical government from oppressing you. And that's why it's so imperative that they disarm us. Mm-hmm. But it goes even farther than that, right, Timmy? Because in the Civil War, Lincoln tried to introduce again interest-free money.
Yeah, and when you look back through history, you find out again, as Churchill and Napoleon pointed out, the history is written by the victor. That everything we know about the Civil War, the American Revolution, is not quite the same. Now, the Civil War wasn't about the abolition of slavery. It was about a divide and conquer technique to take over the United States.
Okay, let's talk about that. After this 3-minute break, let's talk about the real reason for the Civil War. Now, here's a history, ladies and gentlemen. You're not getting anywhere else. Please stay tuned to the Power Hour. We'll be back. Joe Joseph and Tim Watts, Orion Radio Network. Stay tuned.
Are you tired of searching for great talk radio?
Something more important.
Search no more. We are the GCN Radio Network.
Talking about it, educating others. That's what we're doing here at the Power Hour. It's 33 minutes after the hour. Please support the Power Mall. And the way you do that, well, you call us at 877-817-9829, 877-817-9829. We got a lot of specials today. The planting kit. It's only $5 if you purchase $100 or more. You get 2 complete planting kits, including the seeds, the planting mats, the fabric pins, instruction guide, vegetable garden seeds, cucumber, eggplant, yellow tomato, sweet bell pepper, yellow crookneck squash, red tomato, bush beans, zucchini. Then you get the salsa garden also. That includes tomatillo, red tomato, jalapeno pepper, serrano pepper, onions, basil, cilantro, and parsley. That comes in a whole kit. It's really a neat kit. But we've only got like 6 of them. But if you purchase $100 or more from us, you will get that kit for $5. Spider's Web, free with $100 more purchase. We have 17 of those. The Secret History of How the White House Illegally Armed Iraq by Alan Friedman, with the financial, whatever the name of that financial newspaper is, I can't remember, of Europe. Incredible book, ladies and gentlemen. Call us at 877-817-9829, 877-817-9829, or go to thepowermall.com. We're talking today to Tim Watts and Joe Joseph. They do a radio show that you can listen to, and we'll promote that again. It'll be in the email blast also. You can check that out at Orion Network. We want to encourage you to go to the Freedom Link. There's a lot of good radio shows out there, and we encourage you to teach people to go wherever there are networks that are doing alternative media, because one show may appeal to someone, whereas this one may not. And so please check out the Freedom Link at Orion Network. Tim Watts and Joe Joseph are our guests today. We're talking about the history of gun control. All right, we were at the Civil War, and you say that the Civil War did not happen for the reasons that we were told, which we thought it was slavery.
No, Joyce, it was a divide and conquer technique is really what it was. Remember the old saying from John Dickinson, united we stand, divided we fall, and somebody wanted to divide this country. And Lincoln recognized many things back then, and this is a quote from Abraham Lincoln. He says, "The money power preys upon the nation in times of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than the monarchy, more insolent than autocracy, more selfish than bureaucracy. I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned. An era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in the hands of a few and the republic is destroyed. I feel at the moment more anxiety for the safety of my country than ever before, even in the midst of war." So what Lincoln did, Lincoln came up with our second interest-free currency, the Lincoln Greenback. Now, that picked off the people, the heavy money interest from England to no end. The Rothschild interest is who we're talking about. And this is what the London Times wrote about Lincoln's Greenbacks. It's something that's not published in our history books, but nevertheless, this comes from the London Times, speaking specifically about the interest-free greenbacks in the U.S. I quote, "If that mischievous financial policy which had its origin in the North American Republic during the late war in that country should ever become integrated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off its debts and be without debt. Mm-hmm. It will become prosperous beyond precedent in the history of the civilized governments of the world. The brains and the wealth of all countries will go to North America. That government must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe." And that gives you a little bit of idea of the gravity of how they felt about interest-free currency here in the United States. Now, let me move to one other historical document, and I'll let you go back to Joe. In 1863, you have a letter from the Rothschild money interest to New York banking interest, a la the Rockefellers and the Morgans. And this is the quote from that letter. When they're describing the system, when you hear them talk about the system, they're talking about the Federal Reserve System. So here it goes. He says, "The few who understand the system will either be so interested in its profits or be so dependent upon its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. While on the other hand, the great body of people, mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantage that capital derives from the system, will bear its burdens without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is inimical to their interests." Two very interesting quotes, again, that you have to understand, and how they felt about currency here in the United States and wanting to get their hands back in with another central bank. And that's what, the Civil War is all about, dividing this country and trying to get their hands back into the money system here to where they could actually get a central bank set back up. And you know what happened to Lincoln after the Greenbacks. Lincoln was killed.
That's right. That's right. And Tim, you made a great point about the Federal Reserve. That is central banking. The idea of central banking has been around a very, very long time. And, of course, it was in 1913 that the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution made it possible for the federal government to impose a progressive income tax. And that's also, folks, plank number 2 of the Communist Manifesto. having called for a progressive income tax. So also in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson publishes The New Freedom, in which he reveals, since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the U.S. in the field of commerce and manufacturing are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak about their breath, above their breath, when they speak in condemnation of it. And in 1913, the Federal Reserve is created. Of course, it was planned on in the secret meeting in 1910 on Jekyll Island, Georgia. And this is from Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr., the father of the famed aviator. He warned, quote, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power, proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized." And finally, 3 years later, in 1916, Wilson observes, quote, "I'm a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men."
And that was 1916?
That was 1916 that Wilson said that, and it wasn't soon after that, Joyce, that Wilson started having strokes and health problems because he was very depressed. He sold the country out. He sold the country out to the bankers. We don't have a government that represents us and our interests. That's one thing that people need to understand. They represent the interests of a few, the control freaks. People call them, you know, in this time, Timmy, it was the money trust. That's what they called it. And people were plugged in at that time. They understood what the money trust was, and even people in Congress were adamantly opposed to it. You know, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Joe's right on. You know, and Joyce, if you go back and listen, I've got some old audio from the archives, presidential archives, and it's Teddy Roosevelt and William Taft and others on the campaign stump before the big 1912 election. That was a very pivotal election in this country, as Joe was talking about Wilson. But the thing, when you listen to these old speeches, what they talk about is just what Joe said, the money trust. And that's what they called it back then. They were afraid of these people that had accrued so much wealth, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Morgans. And they constantly berated the money trust in this country. And another thing that they talked about is we cannot let a new national bank, a new central bank into this country because it will be the death of this country. Now, I want to back up a little bit from where Joe was. We jumped over probably one of the most tumultuous times in American history, aside from the Civil War, and that was the Reconstruction period. During the Reconstruction period, we had one thing happen that nobody talks about in our school classrooms. We had the assassination of 3 United States presidents in a very short 36-year period of time. Now, for folks in contemporary time here, that would be the same as 1976 until now. So if you can imagine having 3 presidents, Joyce, assassinated from 1976 until now, you'd be saying, my gosh, what the heck is going on in this country? And yet our history books don't talk about that. You had Lincoln assassinated in 1865 after his greenbacks. You had James Garfield assassinated in 1881. You had William McKinley assassinated in 1901. So you have to ask yourself, what sort of behind-the-scenes fight was taking place in this country after the Civil War? And it was just what the money interests wanted. You know, they wanted to divide the country, then they wanted to take it over. But they were meeting some opposition. So they cleared that opposition out of the way, and it was only shortly thereafter, you know, the assassination of McKinley, that we had the formation of the Federal Reserve System. And finally, the money powers got their third central bank, the national bank, the Federal Reserve, back into play in the United States. But there was this incredible tug behind the scenes to wrest power from the United States. And so, you know, Kennedy wasn't the first one, you know, to go over money or over trying to usurp this control system. They had to fight a lot of presidents before just to get this in play. And our history books don't talk about this. They don't talk about this 36-year period of time where you have 3 United States presidents murdered, and every one of them all spoke out against the bankers. They all understood the issue. The bankers knew that, so they got rid of them.
Okay, let's move it up now, since it's 45 minutes after the hour, more to the present. Let's talk in terms, I know Tim or Joe, you have something you want to say regarding our response to all of this.
Right. Well, the thing to understand is they fear us, and they feed off our fear. This is the biggest thing that I hope the listeners understand. This is not a time to be afraid. This is a time to feel empowered, because if they're making such a move for such a gun grab, that means they're quaking in their boots. And the fact is that you have to give your rights away. They can't take them away. They can't legislate them away. Oh, they can come to your door, and they can kick your door in, and they can put you in jail. They could even kill you. But the fact is that we have to stand up for those rights. You know, myself being, I believe in Christ. I'm a Christian, and I'll tell you this: I'm spiritually grounded. I don't live for this life, and I'm not fighting this fight for me. I'm fighting it for my children, who are going to have to inherit this world that we live in. And do I want to see them live in a totalitarian dictatorship? I don't think so. So I'm going to put whatever energy and efforts that I can into this, and understand that my rights don't come from the government. We give the government privilege. We give the government the privilege to represent us, to do the things for us. But we're the boss. So if you have an employee out of control at work or wherever you work, or if you have your own business, then what do you do when that employee becomes unruly or insubordinate? Well, you get rid of them. And that's the thing that the Founding Fathers knew and understood. And that's why the right to bear arms is so important. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that can keep them in check. And if they take the guns away, then what do we have to defend ourselves, our families, and our rights? But this is nothing to be afraid of, folks. They are on the run. This is why. And they know, the money powers know, that they only have a limited amount of time to do this. They came up with the Internet. And the Internet was probably their one glaring, huge mistake that they could ever make. Because now the flow of information is just unbelievable. Everything's at your fingertips. Mm-hmm. So when they came up with this, they said, oh, man, you know what? We have to demonize this, because God forbid if they get all this, and they can pass this information, those that are awake, that are looking, we need to come up with these names for them. Let's call them conspiracy theorists. Let's call them tinfoil hatters. But really, what is it? Conspiracy for the government. The government can put you in jail for conspiracy to commit murder. Conspiracy is very serious. So if it's serious to them, why can't it be serious to us?
Well, it seems to me that they are seeing that there is an increase in the education that the people are doing amongst themselves. We're figuring it out. We're getting it on 9/11. We're getting it on the school shooting in Sandy Hook. We're getting it on no matter what it is. And as we start to get it, they have to use more control. So thus we have the drones for our safety, because it keeps us free from the Taliban. And because we have all these things now that are coming down the pike, they have got to take the way that we can respond to them. And I would like to know when somebody on television is going to say the obvious. Now, this is what I heard in person. I heard Judge Napolitano say when we were in St. Louis at a meeting with him and Ron Paul, is he said, when are people going to realize that the guns are not for hunting, they're for protecting you from the government? And, everybody's been afraid to say that on TV. So whenever Piers Morgan says, well, why do people need an assault rifle? That somebody needs to say, because we are afraid of our tyrannical government.
You know what's interesting, Joyce, is I'm not afraid of my government at all. As a matter of fact, there's a framework with which the government's supposed to operate. I want to see it return to that. And I'm not afraid of the people that are trying to take my guns away. No, 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 no. If anything, it empowers me. It makes me want to fight harder to restore our republic, which is, I mean, it's been hijacked. And the interesting thing is, again, you know, I can't say this enough. They fear us. They know that we're waking up. People in the United States and the world are not stupid, Joyce. They're not stupid at all. If anything, they're just sadly uninformed and misinformed because the mainstream media, which, by the way, has a membership. If you look at all the major media heads, Tim, right? You did some research into this. CFR members, Council on Foreign Relations.
Right.
They
Absolutely.
all belong to it and automatically insert a bias. And number two, remember this. People are selfish, especially in this day and age. Very selfish.
Welcome back to the Power Hour. Thank you for joining us. We're talking to two talk show hosts who do an excellent job on their own radio show called The Freedom Link that's broadcast on Orion Talk Radio. Joe Joseph and Tim Watts. Gentlemen, or Tim, tell people how they can listen to your show, would you please?
Just tune in to OrionTalkRadio.com. And then you can go to the shows and host page, or actually the schedule page. You'll pick up the schedule there. We're on 24/7. And the Freedom Link is on at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, on the Orion Talk Radio Network, and that's OrionTalkRadio.com.
9 p.m. Eastern Time, okay, 8 o'clock Central. All right, let me go back to the idea that they are afraid of us, which is why they want our guns. Now, we're going to talk in the next hour with Charles Heller about how he thinks they're going to go about this and what techniques they'll use. But I think we need to instill in people lack of fear. I mean, it is not us who should be afraid.
People need to feel empowered right now. Remember, everything in this world is backwards. If you look at what makes sense, everything's backwards. You know, and that's the thing. Don't be afraid. Feel empowered. They are on the run. They're the ones that are making this desperate attempt to take your guns away, which, by the way, folks, they don't have the manpower to do this. So what they're going to try and do is they're going to simply try to demonize those that have it, whether it be through mental health checks, whether it be through a registration database, and then they can demonize everybody. Say, well, you know, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're mentally unstable. So then they can go onesie-twosie and knock on doors and everything else. But we have to fight it before it gets there, and then if it gets there, we have to fight it even harder. And the thing to understand is, in order to fight this, you really have to be selfless. The reason why the mainstream media and these talking heads play the game is because the money trust is what controls their paycheck. You know, six or seven individuals control the entire mainstream media. Isn't that right, Tim?
Absolutely. You know, we've got to actually mention, you know, who is actually behind this, and it's the Council on Foreign Relations, Joyce. It was, you know, an organization started in 1921 by Edward Mandell House, a very nefarious figure in American politics. He was there in the Wilson administration, kind of a watchdog for the Rockefellers. And that's what the Council on Foreign Relations is. It's a Rockefeller-funded institution. And this is the one family that really took over this country. The Rockefellers are behind the Federal Reserve. They're behind so much in this country that people don't know about. Now, if for your listeners that don't know about the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, this comes from the late Carroll Quigley, who actually was allowed to study the CFR's papers and to actually look into their history and what they're about. And according to the late Carroll Quigley, he says, the CFR is the American branch of a society which originated in England, that's the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and which believes that national boundaries should be obliterated and a one-world rule established. Now, one other person spoke out about this. It was Rear Admiral Chester Ward. He was a member of the CFR for 16 years, and when he left the CFR, he warned America about their intentions, and he said, the most powerful clique in these elitist groups have one objective in common. They want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty of the national independence of the United States. Now, a second clique of international members in the CFR comprises the Wall Street international bankers, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and all these people. And they're key agents primarily. They want the world banking monopoly from whichever power ends up in the control of global government. And that comes from Rear Admiral Chester Ward, who was a member of the CFR. Now, Joe mentioned about the media. You have to understand why we're being sold yellow cake from Niger and false weapons of mass destruction and all this. And you only understand that when you realize that the media is embedded with tons of members from the Council on Foreign Relations. Brian Williams, Katie Couric, Diane Sawyer, Micah Brzezinski, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Bob Schieffer, Barbara Walters, Judy Woodruff, Paula Zahn, Leslie Stahl, George Stephanopoulos, Jim Lair, David Gergen, Fareed Zakaria, Carrie Moran, Charlie Rose, Aaron Burnett, Rupert Murdoch, Bernard Twelve, Morton Conrad, Gary Cutler, Concha Crowley. The list goes on, folks.
Wow. We got a 1 minute, 10 second break. Wow, we'll be back. 1 minute, 10 second break. We got our final segment coming up. Amazing.